You're listening to the Addiction Free Radio Network. It's time now for Addiction Free Radio with your host, Jann Scott. This is a radio program designed specifically to help you or someone you know. In just a few moments, we'll give out a phone number for you to call if you have questions or would like to participate on tonight's topic. And now, here's Jann.
Good evening, everyone. This is Jann Scott. Welcome to Addiction Free Radio, the only call-in talk show in America about drug addiction, eating disorders, alcoholism, the entire addictive process. We live in a country and a time when everybody's hooked on something. Tonight, we're going to be talking about sexual addictions in light of Ted Bundy's recent revelation and basically confession and admittance that he was a sex addict with his conversation with Dr. Dobson that was on network TV here a couple of nights ago. The talk number here on Addiction Free Radio, 761-1550, 761-1550. Now, we have an interesting program planned here for you. We have some people from the Mile High Council. Let me get this straight here. It's the Mile High Coalition Against Pornography. Is that what it is? I think it is. It's Denise M I have with me here on the program this evening. Also joining us, Salmon will be with us in a tiny bit, who is head of the National Association for Sex Addicts. He'll be joining us here in a little bit on the program. We also are going to have some recovering sex addicts on the program, and we're really going to examine this issue with Bundy right now. This is a good time, actually, to talk about this. We've been talking about this sexual addictions on Addiction Free Radio ever since we've been on the air in 1987. With Bundy's admittance, a lot of so-called experts are sort of poo-pooing the idea of sexual addictions, along with some of the press and some people who are involved in criminology. We have a lot of people out there, basically, that are supposedly experts in the area of sexual crimes that really don't know their earlobe from their ankle. We have some people with us tonight that know a lot about sexual addictions, and we'll be talking with them in a little bit. According to the Rocky Mountain News, okay, this is in today's paper, it was discovered that Bundy's childhood was violent. This is finally coming out here, according to Dr. Dorothy Otnow-Lewis of New Haven, Connecticut. Said Bundy first lived in the home of his maternal grandparents in Philadelphia with a grandfather who was an extremely violent and frightening individual. The grandfather would kick dogs, swing cats by their tails, nice guy, beat people who angered him, and read pornography voraciously. Lewis interviewed Bundy on Monday as his attorneys tried unsuccessfully to prove he was mentally incompetent to be executed. Bundy was electrocuted, we know that. Okay. Her findings were published in detail in Tuesday's editions of the Seattle Times, offering a possible glimpse into the mind of a man linked to as many as 36 killings in the West and in Florida. Bundy exhibited bizarre behavior at his grandparents' house, the psychiatrist said. At age 3, he appeared several times at the bedside of his 15-year-old aunt and just, started to sort of molest her with butcher knives. Was he affected by pornography? He said he was. He said he was a sexual addict. In his final conversation with Dr. Dobson, let's see here. The Daily Camera today had an editorial where they basically were in complete denial about sexual addiction, said that it didn't exist, essentially, said that this was Bundy's, his last attempt to make peace with God. They basically saw him as a con. And actually it was a little upsetting when I read this editorial in Boulder's Daily Camera. It was one of the dopiest things I've seen written. And it perpetuates the kind of ignorance and stupidity and intellectual violence against the cutting-edge knowledge that we have about sexual addiction. You're with Jann Scott here this evening on Addiction Free Radio. Now, the Post, interestingly enough, was one of the only papers that I've seen that approached this idea of sexual addictions. USA Today comes out in their inquiry section, and it says, topic, crime and porn. Bundy told truth about pornography in his last interview before his execution. Mass murderer Ted Bundy said his life had been warped by pornography and sexual violence in magazines, movies, and TV. Were you surprised that he said that? And they go in a little bit on the idea of sexual addiction, but not everybody's really buying it. You're with Jann Scott this evening here on Addiction Free Radio. The talk number, 761-1550. Here we are down by the aromatic Platte River, 1550 on the AM dial. Hopefully we're getting out all over Denver tonight. And you are welcome to join this conversation at any time. Okay, I have with me, joining me right now by phone, Denise M, who is with the Mile High Coalition Against Pornography. Denise, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay, we also have Rich Salmon from Boulder. Are you there, Rich?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and Rich, would you describe the organization that you're with? Because I know it's, actually, I lost the sheet of paper that had your initials on it. I know that you are chairperson of the, let me see if I can get it right, National Association of...
The National Association on Sexual Addiction Problems. We're the Colorado chapter. We call it NASAP for short, N-A-S-A-P.
Okay.
I'm the executive director of the Colorado chapter. Our headquarters are in California, and we're gradually forming chapters around the country in different states.
You are also a certified addictions counselor here in the state of Colorado?
No, I'm not.
You're not. Okay, you're...
I'm a pastoral counselor. Was a pastor earlier in my life, but no, I'm basically right now just working as the director of NASAP, trying to...
I thought you were a CAC or something like that, no? Or you were working... Okay, well, whatever, fine. Okay, you did you did some internships at some hospitals here in the Denver area?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was when I was doing some pastoral education training last year.
Well, that's good to know. Okay. Well, let me just kick this over to Denise. Okay, Denise, do you have any comments on what I first on the opening, on some of the things that I I read, and some of the openings that I've had here about Ted Bundy and whether or not he was a sex addict, and maybe how you see that as the chairperson of the Mile High Coalition Against Pornography here in Denver?
Well, I definitely believe his story in that it's very common, for being exposed to pornography at that young of an age, that in his type of a personality, that it could progress to his acting out in that manner. And there's been other people, like, for instance, Arthur Gary Bishop in Utah, who murdered young boys and was a homosexual pedophile. And he has pretty much the same story to tell. And, I mean, Ted Bundy's certainly not alone.
Well, that's what he said in his interview with Dobson. He said there are a lot of other Ted Bundys out there, and that we have been perhaps misdiagnosing people like him. And I mean, what blows me away is that this comes out at the end. Why wasn't he talking about it earlier? You have any insight on that, Rich? Rich Salmon with...
I don't... I haven't read anything to tell me why he came forward here at the end, although, except just the observation that it seems like it was an end-of-life sort of experience that he was going through, and finally he was going to get honest about some of the murders that he'd committed, and I understood that some of it was related to sort of a end-of-life conversion that took place, but I really I haven't read enough to know the answer to that question.
What amazes me is, here's a guy. I mean, his last interview, his final interview, was not with Geraldo. It was with Dr. Dobson, and a couple of things really strike me as completely ironic. One, he confesses to a bunch of the murders. Okay. Two, he comes out and says that he's a sex addict. and that he was compulsively driven. 3, he also mentioned that something really had a hold of him as though it were an evil force, and I'm quoting him there, the evil force part. Then he accepts Christ. He is saved, and the way I see it is the guy dies and goes to heaven. Meanwhile, we have the rest of America is looking at Ted Bundy going, this no-good dirtbag, he deserves, and people just vented all of their rage and anger and hatred on him. Yet, if we look at television and we look at the movies, we have tremendous amounts of slasher movies. Last night we talked a little bit about the fact that MTV is becoming progressively more and more sexual and violent. We have an increase in teenage crimes for young addicts who are going into treatment from the people that I've been talking to. And it's sort of like, as a society or as Americans, we want our blood-curdling violence any way we can get it, whether it's with Ted Bundy or whether it is with Halloween 13. And it's like there's this, I wonder, it's like we've created the conditions to foster Ted Bundy's existence, and it's almost like he's become our victim. Well, we'll come back to Rich Salmon and Denise M here on Addiction Free Radio right after this break.
Addiction Free Radio. Jann will be back in just a moment. Addiction Free Radio is the only program on the globe that we know of broadcasting information about addiction. Take that important first step for your own well-being and participate in tonight's show. It's absolutely free. Jann will be back with the phone number in just a moment.
Does someone you know or someone you love have a drug or alcohol problem? Bowling Green of Colorado can help.
Alcoholism affects more than just the person who has the disease. It affects the whole family. There's confusion and anger, misunderstandings and hurt. Often the family has stopped communicating. The closeness that once existed has disappeared. We understand. That's why we provide treatment for everyone close to the alcoholic. Husbands, wives, children, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, everyone joins together for treatment. And the results are wonderful. Families learn to trust again. Soon they're working together, helping each other. There's lots of hugging, even laughter, and it all starts with love.
You don't have to want help to get help. Call Bowling Green of Colorado. 333-5540. 333-5540.
We're back here on Addiction Free Radio. You're with Jann Scott this evening. My guest is, I have several guests by phone here in Denver. Denise M, the chairman of the Mile High Coalition Against Pornography. We have Rich Salmon, who is chairperson for the National Association of
Sexual Addiction Problems.
Sexual Addiction Problems. Okay, to Denise, let's talk about the harms of pornography. I mean, you're someone who has obviously studied this. Maybe you can, and you have a task force with a newsletter and fairly active here in the community. What are some of the points that you think are important to make here?
Well, like back in 1970 when they had the first Attorney General's Commission on Pornography, and comparing it to 1986 with the Meese Commission on Pornography, there's been quite an increase on what is available and what pornography is. Back in 1970, what they studied would be considered softcore now, and what they studied in 86 was very violent sadomasochism, fetishes, all of the deviant behaviors that have escalated over the years, and that's why we're seeing an increase in addictions and problems with pornography and the harms associated with it.
Well, what I find interesting is, and I've heard some other therapists say that 10 years ago, half the stuff that's on cable television right now was considered very X-rated and would not ever be allowed to be certainly not on TV. I guess that's one of the concerns of mine anyways would be the violent slasher sex movies. Those seem to be doing more damage to people than anybody I know, or anything that I know.
Well, and even just last year in the Colorado legislature, there was a bill that was introduced and then passed making it illegal to rent the smut films or the actual depictions of death to minors. And previous to that, that was the big thing, is after school to go to a after-school party and watch the video. And they're quite gruesome.
Rich, your comments.
Well, the increase of permissiveness in our society for both sex and violence is certainly a trend that hasn't peaked yet. It's certainly come on very strong here in the last 10, or I guess the last 20 years. And I don't think we know where it's all going yet. But for people to begin to act out the things that they are vicariously experiencing while they're watching movies is certainly something that anybody understands in terms of human behavior.
Bundy said that he started off with softcore porn, as I understand him, and it led him into harder and harder in order for him to satisfy his compulsivity. He had to, it wasn't just reading or looking at the material was enough. He had to actually shift into the behavior of it. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, there's more things going on with Bundy than just his sexual compulsivity. And for compulsivity or an addiction for it to be progressive is something we all understand. We understand that alcoholism and other chemical dependencies are progressive, and that and one of the characteristics of an addiction is the fact that a person develops a tolerance for the behavior and or the drug, and therefore it takes more and other kinds in order for the person to continue to get a high. So for him to say that he started out doing something that was simpler and then he progressively had to do more in order to continue to get a high from it, it would be very understandable within the concept of addictions.
Right.
Now, one of the things that I think is very lacking from the Dr. Dobson interview and also from most of the media coverage is that while Bundy did describe himself rather well as being sexually addicted, and those of us who've been talking about it the last few days locally said, it seems like a pretty standard description of someone who got hooked on pornography and on sexual highs. But there's a whole part of violence that he has in his makeup that is not characteristic of most sex addicts. In fact, it's certainly it's present very seldom. And the origin of the thing that particularly interested me was his saying that he grew up in a normal Christian home and everything was wonderful, and then all of a sudden, because he got involved with pornography when he was a teenager, that it turned him into this terrible monster, is an awfully, it's too simplistic and has some serious problems, as I see it, in trying to understand his story.
Well, it looks like, from what I can see here, that that he perhaps had some dysfunctionality with his grandparents.
Yes.
I mean, if his grandfather is hooked on pornography and he's doing strange things at 3 years old,
Right.
It started very early on, and I wonder too what some people would look at, quote unquote, a normal Christian home, and in a not so normal Christian home. I mean, not too much has been looked at there. He did say that, but I really wonder. Being a Christian is one thing. Growing up in a normal Christian home is something else. I mean, I see so many times with people who are caught in Christian religious cults. I mean, they may be very scripturally dead on, yet they may be way off in the extreme someplace and being battered emotionally in the name of Christianity. We just talked about that here about 3 weeks ago. With the Mayats. In fact, Bethesda has an entire unit around cults and people who are beat up with doctrine. And that's a question that I have. I wonder how normal his
Yes,
Christian family was.
I certainly share your question, and I suspect, and what it causes me to be suspect of is that it was normal to him, just as most everyone would say the home that I grew up in was a normal home because that's the experience that each individual has. Therefore, we measure the rest of the world by whatever we did grow up in. But be that as it may, there certainly were some things that were not meeting the needs of this little boy when he was growing up. Something was damaging him emotionally, whatever that is, and whoever it is that's going to uncover it, that would set him up so that when he did try violence and when he did get involved with sexual deviation, that it hooked him in the same way that another person growing up in a dysfunctional family would try alcohol and get hooked on alcoholism.
Now, Dr. Dateweiler here from Metro and Glenn Niebling have often, they've stated on this program before that they always see addictions in couples or in pairs. So sexual addiction generally will not be out there by itself.
Yeah, we usually say clusters rather than pairs.
Clusters, okay.
Yeah, and the cluster would be different for each individual based upon what the experience was when, as a child or an adolescent, they were reaching for something to help them cope with an otherwise impossible emotional situation that they're in.
Rich, considering you're probably one of the people here in the United States, and I've talked with you a great deal, and you've certainly been an advisor for Addiction Free Radio, you're probably one person that knows as much, if not more, than most people in this state. Would you say that pornography is addictive? I mean, is there a high that people can, I mean, essentially, was Bundy a sex addict as far as you could see without even knowing the guy? And is pornography addictive? I mean,
well, yes, and so is food, and so is gambling, and so is working. In other words, a person can become compulsive about almost any human behavior. So to answer your question, I need to put it in several parts, and that is, yes, a person can become addicted to pornography. And I would say, secondly, yes, there is a high that goes on through pornography. In other words, when a person begins to get into that fantasy and that sexual frame of mind, there is a chemistry that changes in the brain, and the brain begins to create a substance, we call it PEA for short, phenylethylamine, which is a substance a whole lot like cocaine, that it has a very it causes a very wonderful feeling, and it is a wonderful anesthetic. And so, having got into that fantasy frame of mind while looking at pornography, whether it be in magazines or movies or however, or even be at the art museum, is the human being begins to experience something that feels good and is exciting. And it is that sort of experience that a normal person would experience, enjoy a little bit of it, and then lay it down, while a person who becomes addicted to it can't lay it down.
You know, it's almost like with a person like Bundy, he was led to kill for his fix, not unlike a crack addict who will kill to get money to fix. And I mean, there seem to be similarities there to me. I mean, you know, we have death connected with crack all over the place. Now we have death connected with the Ted Bundys of the world. And I have one other question for you too. Is he an isolated case in terms of sex addicts, or the combination of sex and violence, as far as you can see? He said that there are a lot of him out there.
Well, let's clarify it a little bit.
Okay.
Among those who are sexually addicted in our population, less than 15% of them are acting out their sexual compulsivity in a way that victimizes and violates other people. So, first of all, let's bear in mind that 85% of the people who are sexually addicted are not doing something that victimizes other people. Now, taking then the ones who are victimizing other people, who would therefore be offending the law.
Mm-hmm. 15%, only 15% of the sex addicts, as you see, do that.
Right.
Okay.
And of that population, there is a very, very small percentage who get as crazy as Ted Bundy. Mm-hmm. And of course, the news media has been running stories like that today. One of the articles in the Post today listed a whole lot of of those who have been serial killers.
About 10 of them.
Yeah. And the fact that you would take an entire nation and you'd look back 10 or 15 years in order to pick out that many stories says there's very, very few people that get that crazy.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean, though, that of the 15% of people who are sexually addicted, that there aren't a lot of people in that group. You know, in Colorado, there's something like 100,000 sexually addicted people, and if we were to take those percentages and use them, then that would say that something like 15,000 people are not only sexually addicted, but they are doing some behavior which offends and victimizes other people. Most of them are doing things like exhibitionism or voyeurism.
Okay, let me give the phone number here again. 761-1550 here on Addiction Free Radio. We actually, all of our lines are filled right now. Just keep calling, we'll just keep calling and we'll get you on. Denise M, I did not mean to leave you out of this, okay? So any comments so far on what Rich Salmon has said? And you must have some things rambling through your brain there at this point. Yes?
I guess what goes through my mind is that we do place, what you talked about earlier, we do place a stigma on people that are sexually addicted, in that it's one of the taboos that we heap the guilt on them, and that these people need to be helped the same as any other people that are addicted to something else.
Yeah, so you also then, as far as the Mile High Coalition Against Pornography, you see this kind of behavior as sexual addiction also. I mean,
right.
Kind of connected up there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as far as, what do you want to do with the Mile High Coalition Against Pornography? What do you see that needs to happen? What are some of your baselines here that you need to see, or that you see that needs to happen here in
Well, one
Colorado?
of our goals is education, and obviously by the media, getting this story on Ted Bundy and reporting it to the people, some public education is happening, but we need to point out the other things too, that like what Rich was talking about, that this is 15% of the population, and yet we do have some responsibility to the people out there to curb this, and even by the laws that have been passed recently in Congress in November, the government's going to be cracking down on it because they see the harms of it.
Yeah, I often wonder myself why we run. I mean, I think it's a responsibility of us as individuals to get this handled. Why are we running a slasher and violent sex movies on network television on a regular basis? Why is Channel 4, Channel 2, and Channel 9, why are they running these movies when we know that it causes so much damage? Actually, the way I see it, on the other hand, and I'll just be perfectly blunt about it, that they're vultures out there picking whatever they're going to pick to get ratings, and they're going to feed it to us as long as we buy it. And that they basically have no sense of morality, and it's until we stand up and say, no more, will they stop? I mean, they could care less. That's how I see it. They're in it for the bucks. And as long as we buy violent pornography, they're going to sell it to us right on network television. We'll be back here with the views of Rich Salmon and Denise M here on Addiction Free Radio. 761-1550 is the talk number. We do not have any lines open. Keep trying. We'll get you in here in just a minute.
Addiction Free Radio. Jann will be back in just a moment. Addiction Free Radio is the only program on the globe that we know of broadcasting information about addiction. Take that important first step for your own well-being and participate in tonight's show. It's absolutely free. Jann will be back with the phone number in just a moment.
Does your child or an adolescent you know have a drug or alcohol problem? Bowling Green of Colorado can help.
Let's say your child has been experimenting with drugs or alcohol. Suppose there's even been some trouble in school or with the law. You're upset, but you're confused too, and maybe a little frightened. What should you do? The first thing you need is information, facts. Not everyone who experiments will become addicted, but experimentation can lead to addiction. In fact, about 1 in every 10 teenagers who tries alcohol or drugs becomes dependent. The important thing to remember is that addiction is a disease. It can be treated, and recovery can be terrific for you and your child.
You don't have to want help to get help. Call Bowling Green of Colorado. 333-5540. 333-5540.
Okay, we're back here on Addiction Free Radio. You're with Jann Scott. My guests are Denise M, you are the chairperson, are you not, Denise?
The president.
President. Oh, okay. Well, close. I mean, the same, basically, of the Mile High Coalition Against Pornography. And I notice you guys have kind of taken your knocks a little bit in the press. Some of the press has not been just, they see this Ted Bundy thing as a place where you can now kind of get up on your soapbox. They see you as a little preachy rather than being caring about. I mean, it just bothers me when the press does that. I'm a very opinionated person, and when I see that, I just get really annoyed with the press.
We look at that as that's just part of our job, and we have vocal opposition, and that's just their beliefs. But people like the ACLU and attorneys hired by pornographers, I mean, we don't take much stock in their opposition.
So in other words, the ACLU is that they're not exactly on your side, you would say, with this?
Their position is that once child pornography has been made, nothing should stop its distribution, and we obviously disagree with that.
Really? I wish we had somebody from the ACLU here. Sometimes they're pretty right on, and other times they're pretty right off.
They're not at all impressed with us.
Rich, I might ask you, too, before we go to the Carlos here on the phone. What kind of, have you been getting a lot of phone calls with your organization in terms of the media or any of that kind of thing?
We really haven't concerning the Ted Bundy event, and it's interesting. I was interviewed today by USA Today.
When is this, and what is it? And why don't you give us some information on where help is available, too, while we're doing this before we go to the phones?
Well, our association, of course, is still very young. We're just over a year old. And in California, next week on February the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we'll be having a national forum with people coming from around the country with research and sharing things about what they're doing with treatment modalities and so on.
It's a very new field, isn't it?
Yes, and we're having a Colorado conference, our second one.
Have you invited Dr. Dobson?
No, we haven't.
Why don't you call him up and invite him? I'd love to see him go to this. I'm serious. I just thought I'd throw that out.
Dobson would be a good contributor, and I wouldn't have any problem with that at all. But at least I know that he's not on the program. I know that Dr. Patrick Carnes from Minneapolis is on the program, and Dr. Jennifer Schneider from Tucson. And
Carnes is considered to be the foremost expert in the country on sexual addictions, isn't
he? Yes, he is. And his books and his seminars and so on are just becoming more and more popular all the time. He's been on countless media shows, and so there's a lot of interest in the subject right now.
What's available local for help that you know?
Well, locally what we're doing, for example, on March 2nd, 3rd, and 4th at the Ramada Hotel in Westminster, that's on the Boulder-Denver Turnpike, we'll have a 3-day conference for Colorado and Wyoming people. And in addition to Dr. Carnes coming here to speak at that time, and Dr. Jennifer Schneider from Tucson and her husband, we're also going to have people from around the state who are doing research and working with sex addicts and their family members. And so we have about 15 people coming to give their papers and talk about their research and what they're doing in their treatment centers and so on.
Okay, let's go to the phone. Carlos, you're on Addiction Free Radio. Hi.
Hi.
What can we do for you tonight?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that there is help out there for anyone that is addicted to pornography. Because I was addicted to pornography, and I am no longer in it anymore.
So you are a recovering sex addict?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, you have to speak right up too when you're talking. Okay. How long were you addicted, and what happened to you, and how did you end up in recovery?
I was addicted for about 2 years, and I'm a born again Christian, and I was going to church, and I was still in it. And I just, I cried out for help, from God. I said, God, you got to help me. And he did that. And he allowed me to go to Pure Life Ministries.
What's Pure Life?
It's for addicts. It's for addicts.
It's for any kind of addicts?
For sexual addictive addicts.
So Pure Life is like a support group for sex addicts?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I'm getting a lot of counseling through the church, my church. So our church has a very good support and counseling for that too.
Oh, really? So, I mean, does your church specialize in sexual addictions or something, or in terms of the counseling, or what?
No, we deal with those kind of, we just deal with those kind of things.
Uh-huh. So, now, you said you were a sex addict for 2 years?
Yeah, about 2 years.
It only took you 2 years to get hooked?
Yeah, it did.
What Rich was saying earlier, does that seem to follow through? I mean, did you find that you were getting a high off of pornography and it was similar to alcohol? And the second part of that question is, do you find that addictions go in clusters with you?
Oh, yes, it didn't start the first time, that I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
It started after a little bit, and then it got more and more and more into it, and by about 2 years later, I started getting into the hardcore pornography.
Interesting. Do you have any questions for either Denise or for Rich Salmon?
No.
Or vice versa? Do you guys have any questions for Carlos, who's called? He's evidently a recovering sex addict. How long have you been in recovery, Carlos?
It's been about a year and a half.
Really? Well, great. Congratulations. Do you have any questions for him?
I would like to throw out that Pure Life Ministries is a support group for, recovering sex addicts that's based for Christians, and that the Bible does go hand in hand with the 12-step program.
Oh, really? Oh, this is very good. Let's give the number for Pure Life.
It's 420-3960.
420-3960. That's Pure Life Ministries for Sexual Addicts. And how often do they meet?
They meet every Monday night at 881 North Federal.
Every Monday night. Now, I heard, it seems to be that I read someplace that there were 20 groups in Denver, Denise. Did you say something like that there were 20 groups in Denver for sexual addicts, or is that, am I...
No, I still told you that.
You told me that.
There's 21 groups statewide.
Of what now?
I'm counting, Pure Life would be one of those 21 that I'm aware of. There are 21 self-help groups which are using the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous to help sexual addicts or sexual co-addicts.
Mm-hmm.
And Pure Life is one of those meetings. There's meetings in the Denver area every night of the week, 12-step meetings. For example, there's a Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous meeting on Sunday night, on Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights in the Denver area.
Okay.
There are meetings of Sexaholics Anonymous that are on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday nights.
Carlos, I want to thank you for giving us a call here. We're going to say goodbye because we have some other calls coming in, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for calling. We appreciate it. 761-1550 is the talk number here on Addiction Free Radio, 761-1550. Rich, I have a question for you. Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay. Now what... Okay, so Pure Life, I want to be really clear on this. Pure Life is a Christian ministry that works in conjunction with the 12 steps. Can non-Christians go there, Denise?
Well, yes, they can. What we've had, too, is when there's a couple that has this problem, and, like, say, for instance, the man is the addict, and he is still in the stage of denial, then his wife can come and, maybe get some support or help on, what her role should be and how to better, handle her relationship with her husband.
That's great. Okay, so now then Rich, there's Sexaholics Anonymous, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and they have meetings here. Is there a phone number for them, or?
Well, all of the groups have a common phone number that anyone in Colorado can phone, and then they in turn will, the people who respond to the phone calls will network them back out to whatever meetings are in their part of the state.
Let's give that phone number out right now. What is that phone number, and what's it for?
That number is 427-0176.
0176. Now, what's that number to?
And 427-0176 goes into a recording machine where people are asked to leave their name and number, and someone will call them back from those 12-step meetings. And so if they live in Englewood, then they're going to get a call from somebody from the Englewood Saturday night group, and if they live in Fort Collins, they're going to get a call from somebody who is from the Tuesday and Saturday meetings that take place in Fort Collins, etc.
What's the difference between Sexaholics Anonymous and Sex Love Addicts Anonymous?
Well, they're just primarily groups that started separate from one another. Sexaholics Anonymous was started by a technical writer out in California. He was an Alcoholics Anonymous member who realized that if he would use that same program to apply to his sexual compulsivity, that he might be able to stop the behavior that he didn't know how to stop. And while he was starting that effort in 1977 in Hollywood, California, there was someone else. There was a entertainer that was using the AA program to help with his problem in Boston, Massachusetts, and he happened to call his recovery group Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and so they didn't know about one another.
Let's do this. We're going to go back to the phones because they tell me we have a lot of calls lined up here. We're going to go to Shirley with Lakewood. You're on Addiction Free Radio. Are you there?
I am.
Hi. Okay, what can we do for you tonight?
I was wondering, I heard that Bundy also had a manic depressive situation. Wouldn't that come into play as well as the pornography?
Rich Solomon?
Absolutely. In fact, the depression and the manic, both the depressed and the manic phase, seem to cause problems for addicts, whether they're sex addicts or violence addicts, as Bundy was, or whether they're alcoholics and or addicted to gambling. And that is, when the person gets depressed, then they do their compulsive behavior to try to feel better, and then when they get in their manic stage, and they're feeling so on top of the world, they do it to celebrate.
Was he ever actually found mentally ill?
He certainly is. I really don't know what the medical history is on him, but I do. I certainly view him as being
Let's put it this way.
ill.
He was a very sick boy, and I believe that we had so much contempt and so much rage and hatred for the acts that he committed that we looked right beyond his illness. We looked right beyond the sexual addiction. That's why some people are at this point going, oh, hogwash to sexual addictions, and that's why we're talking about it here tonight. But go ahead, Shirley. Do you have another question?
Well, that's all. I was just thinking that probably pornography coupled with his mental illness was probably a contributory factor.
Good call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. You're with Jan Scott here on Addiction Free Radio. The talk number 761-1550. We've got a couple lines open right now. 761-1550 here on Addiction Free Radio. We're taking your calls now. My guests tonight, Denise M from the Mile High Coalition against pornography, and Rich Solomon, who is a pastoral person even, and also an expert in sexual addictions, one of the people who has really done an incredible amount of research and devoted a lot of time toward helping a lot of us explore this phenomena, or this actually addictions. It's just another addiction. Let's talk about. I am also of the opinion that what happened to Bundy was demonic. That he said there was some kind of evil force that came over him. I feel that that addiction, anyways, is basically a spiritual problem, and that with him it became tremendous. It just became extreme. He's like the crack addict on the street who is robbing, stealing, and murdering to support his habit. And I see no difference between that person, who we don't single out and talk about, and Ted Bundy, and Bundy rather. And I wanted to put this to both Denise and to Rich. what you feel about that. I mean, I'll come right out and say, and I can be criticized to death on this one, but I really feel that the devil had this guy. I mean, if he had anybody, he had this guy fully. Any comments on that? I'll start with Denise.
Well, certainly being, in the places he was, using pornography, say adult bookstores or theaters or wherever, coupled with the alcohol problems, he was certainly opening himself up to demonic influences.
Okay. How about you, Rich?
Well, the acts that he did were just horrendous, and therefore anyone is going to be searching for some kind of a label to put on it. And so I can understand you're putting a demonic label on it, since that's that fits your way of understanding those.
Well, it's just the problem with Satan is that he makes people think that everything's okay, and it doesn't really. When he's talked about compartmentalizing those acts, I don't know. That's just my opinion on it. Let's go to the phones here. We're going to go to Janet in Denver. You're on Addiction Free Radio. Hi.
Hi. I just listening to the media and things talking about Bundy. I just don't understand why people have such a hard time believing in pornographic or sexual addiction. I mean, it's a gradual desensitization of normal sexual behavior into more and more deviant or violent sexual ideas or acts. And I think in any addiction that you slowly get into it and you need more and more and more. People go from, say, marijuana to crack or whatever. And we don't have any problem with a chemical dependency, but it seems like with a moral type dependency, it's real hard to accept.
Yeah, process addiction. I mean, there were people just making fun of us who were talking about codependency and relationship addiction and addiction to chocolate and food here a couple of years ago. I mean, I've been verbally lambasted myself in the press for not so much anymore, but they were having a heyday when we would talk about this stuff publicly. You speak, Janet, as though you kind of know about this.
Well, I've read a little bit on pornography, and there have been studies done with rapists in prison, and something like 80% of them said that they were involved with pornographic material. And I just don't see any problem with, if you fill your mind with a lot of pornography as far as violent in nature and more deviations, why you wouldn't eventually act out on it in some way. Maybe not as violently as Bundy, but, maybe in child pornography or incest or rape, certainly.
Yeah.
And I just think society needs to take a look at this and not just say, we're not talking about necessarily Playboy or things that are like that, but the real hardcore slasher, incest, rape, mutilations, and things like that people are filling their minds with and watching on television.
Yeah, it's almost like it's common day. It's like nobody's paying any attention here. Nobody really cares. That's what I get. Sounds like you're taking care of kids tonight, Jan.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to talk on the radio with someone.
Well, thanks for your call.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Any comments there, Denise, from this last caller, Janet, and then Rich?
Well, like what we talked about at the beginning of the program with, our, TV allowing to air what they do air, it's almost like a double standard that it can be on TV, but don't you dare let it affect your life. And yet, any high school kid that goes to a movie and watches a movie about, like, say, hot rod cars or something, watch them drive out of the parking lot of the theater.
I race stock cars. You go to the stock car track out here at Colorado National Speedway. All of the racers wait for all of the fans to leave because they all race down the road and try to kill one another. 761-1550 is the talk number. We do have some lines open now. You can get your calls in at 761-1550 here on Addiction Free Radio. Rich, and did you have any comments on our last call?
Well, I'm delighted to hear Janet speak and just to mention that it seems to be very believable to her. And I think more and more people are beginning to believe in this concept that there is an illness present in some of these behaviors, and it's not just a terrible, deviant human behavior that everyone throws up their hands at and says, goodness, I can't understand this, so I'll throw it out, and I'll throw out the people that are involved in it as well.
The people that say, goodness, I can't understand this. And they, as an example, in Aspen, they were having, these ridiculous drinks named after Bundy, and the sort of the media, the various radio stations around town kind of got into it and had these Bundy roasts. And I looked at that and I thought, I bet underneath the people who are promoting those kind of events where it's like, let's hang him off with his head, let's, really make a
public spectacle.
Yeah, I bet underneath that those people are sex addicts.
That seems like an awful harsh judgment.
Right, but I make harsh judgments.
In other words, human beings get excited about whatever the exciting story is of the day, and so people like to turn out and watch something. And people have been attending hangings and lynchings for ever since the world began. It just seems to be a human experience to want to get the adrenaline up and watch something exciting that's going on.
I think that we loved what Ted Bundy did, and we lie about it. And those very same people that make the most noise about what he did will be out watching Halloween 13, saying what a dirtbag Bundy was. And I think that we live in a society of liars about this stuff. We live in a society of wimps, of people that will not take responsibility for what's going on in our lives. I think we sit back. It's all one big television. It's all one big movie. Bundy became part of the movie. I mean, I don't know. That's how I see it. I know. You're a clinician, Rich, and you're very calm, but I just get so annoyed when I see
Well, one of the things that I wrote about in my article in our newsletter this month, I think is appropriate. I was writing about the stigma attached to deviant sexual behavior, and especially to sexual addiction, and just making the comment that we often want to single out an individual and let them become a scapegoat for us, and somehow we think if we can make this person bigger than life, just a monster that is so huge that we can then disassociate ourselves that any of this problem and any of this compulsivity and loss of control is present in any of the rest of us. And then we take this bigger-than-life monster out and we destroy it, and we think somehow or other it's going to take away the sins of the nation, as the scapegoat did in biblical times for the Israelites. And when it's all said and done, and Bundy's put in his grave, lo and behold, we find it's still all with us.
Well, there's another one. I mean, look, before Bundy, it was Jimmy Swaggart, and before him, it was Jessica Hahn and the Bakers. I mean, we're going to go back to the phones here. We've got Jim from Lakewood. You're on Addiction Free Radio. Hi.
Yes.
What can we do for you tonight?
Yes, my name's Jim.
Yes.
And I'd like to make a comment on your program. Basically in the lines that Denise M is heading on.
Okay. Are you a recovering addict yourself?
No, I'm not. I am...
The way you said my name's Jim, I almost was expecting, I'm something or another, but go ahead.
No, I run a small group in my church.
Oh, okay.
For the purpose of...
What church is that?
Huh?
What church is it?
Green Mountain Christian Church.
Okay.
And our purpose is education on the issues of the problems that pornography causes. And we've worked with Denise and the Mile High Coalition quite extensively on it, and we have brought a new awareness to our congregation and basically to our community on the issues. And it's really amazing how many people would rather ignore it, the whole issue, than to confront it. And with a little bit of education, you find out how real severe it really is, and how much effect it's had over the years to our society.
I've worked for the past 14 years with a lot of alcoholics and addicts and all different types of addicts, and almost without fail, most alcoholics and addicts that I've met oftentimes transfer into a sexual addiction, whether they be in a church or whether they just be in AA or whatever. And I've just kind of seen that. Any comments on that, maybe to you, Rich, or to Jim? Do you see that happening, where people maybe sober up or get off of food and then get compulsively addicted to...
Yeah, sex does seem to be a very hidden issue in the cluster of compulsive things that are going on with a person. And so many of the people that are coming now into the 12-step programs for sex addicts were formerly either worked the program of Alcoholics Anonymous or the program of Overeaters Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's coincidental. It seems like a lot of times, even though Bill Wilson was very clear when he wrote the AA Big Book in saying when you do your fourth-step inventory, be sure and do a thorough sexual inventory.
Yeah.
It seems that so many people don't get that done in AA.
We don't seem to talk very much about sex in the church either, in terms of the fact that it's, how God intended it, and, exactly, what is, not so much what's permissible and what's not permissible, but what's pleasurable and what is, what edifies or glorifies the Lord in terms of sex. It seems to be one of those things that we just don't talk about. Is it okay to have sex with pornography or not? We don't... You don't ever hear people talk. Do you talk about that kind of stuff, Jim, at your group?
Yes, we do, and it's what we've hit on is that the pure and the what God had intended it to be is so grossly distorted through exploitation that before we even hardly reach puberty, we are so our perception of this God gift is so distorted, there's a good chance that we'll never experience what is meant to happen.
Jim, I want to thank you for calling. They let me know we're running out of time here, so thanks for calling and joining the program tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, God bless you. 761-1550 is the talk number. We have time here for maybe one more 30-second call if you want to call us. We're just about out of time, so Denise, I want to go to you. Do you have any closing statements that you would like to make considering either this Ted Bundy situation or pornography in Denver, what you would like to see happen or what maybe people need to do in the state of Colorado to help contain this?
Well, 2 points. First off, to follow up on what Jim was talking about, not all churches will accept any talk about pornography in their congregations, and churches like Jim's are unique in that they do face the problem head on.
A lot of churches won't even talk about addiction. They deny addiction even exists.
Right, and they tend to spiritualize everything and, let's get down to the basics and deal with the problem and help them where they're at. But also, too, our obscenity statute here in Colorado is under appeal to the state Supreme Court and will be heard, it could be heard any day now. And there's one Supreme Court justice that has said that anything that comes to him regarding obscenity, he would vote in favor of the pornographers. And so it's something that we do, need to concentrate on with our prayers and our efforts of calling or, speaking out on it or whatever.
Okay, good. Now, let's get the phone number for the Mile High Coalition. Let's get that here on tape, too. So if people want to contact you quickly, what's that number?
It's 420-3960.
Okay, thank you, Denise, for being on the program tonight. Rich Salmon, thank you for being here with us this evening. And do you want to give the phone number for your organization also if people want to get your newsletter or contact you or become involved?
Sure. Our phone number is 499-7969, and we'd be happy to hear from people who are trying to locate professional help and or get in touch with 12-step self-help groups. And I do want to clarify that the percentage we use of sex addicts of the general population of our state would be 3%. Within that group of people, those who are violating others are 15% of that 3%.
Rich, we have to go. I really thank you for being on the program tonight. This is I wish we had more time. We're completely out.
Glad to do it.
Thanks. Okay, now we're going to be doing another program on this. We're going to have Dr. Richard Dateweiler on, plus Glenn Niebling over at Porter Hospital. That'll be on the 10th of February, okay? We'll have that program, and hopefully we'll have Rich Solomon and Denise also join us. So we'll be doing another program on sexual addictions. But tomorrow night we'll be back here on Addiction Free Radio, same time, 8 o'clock, right here on 1550 AM. Tell your friends. This is Jan Scott saying good night and God bless you.
You've been listening to Addiction Free Radio with your host, Jann Scott. Addiction Free Radio is on every night at 7 o'clock Mountain Time on most of these same stations. If you would like a cassette tape of tonight's broadcast, send $3 check or money order to Addiction Free Radio, Post Office Box 545, Lyons, Colorado, 80540. That's Post Office Box 545, Lyons, Colorado, 80540.